the Now That We're a Family podcast.
All right. Well, Pastor Chris Wiley, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Your books, The Household and the War for the Cosmos, as well as Man of the House, I got them both right here, have been a tremendous blessing to me and to our family. And it's come to find out when a husband, when a father is encouraged in his faith and in his roles, the whole house reaps the benefit of that. The whole house sees the ramifications of that. And so, in turn, Katie has been a beneficiary
Yeah.
of your writing. Yes.
Glad to hear it. Thanks.
So I want to get to talking about the household, why you would ever think to have such a dramatic title of a book, The Household and the War for the Cosmos. It seems a bit
Yeah.
dramatic. I also
Yeah.
want to talk about, go ahead.
Yeah, a little over the top, maybe, huh?
Yeah, I think that's probably what I thought when I saw the cover. It's like, hey,
Right.
come on, be serious.
Right.
So I want to talk about that as well as just manhood, masculinity,
Sure.
um, and then also something that's really struck me is piety. You know, you speak to piety,
Right.
um, and I think like many people, for the longest time, probably my whole young adult life, I would hear that word, and the image that I conjured in my mind was something that did not inspire me at all. It was
Right.
something that was yeah, felt like the antithesis of who I wanted to actually come across as a Christian man. And yet
Right.
you've really changed my perspective on that. So we want to get to all that, but could you, for our listeners, give us a background? You know, maybe what are you currently doing? Where do you come from? And why is it that you thought of to write about family?
Okay. Well, I'm currently in Battleground, Washington, where I serve a growing church with lots of great folks. I'm really glad to be here. But I've only been here about 3 years. Before that, I was in New England for 35 plus years, between Boston and Cape Cod and Connecticut. And I served a church in Connecticut for nearly 15 years. But in terms of my life going further back, my father was an academic, and this was the 1960s, so there was all sorts of crazy stuff going on college campuses. Um, Something like what we see today. Um, so this is not my first rodeo on this kind of stuff. It passes. We'll get beyond all the craziness that we see these days. But so it was during those years that our household broke up, and I found myself as a ward of the state, living in Western Pennsylvania, which is where my ancestors are from. Prior to that, we were in St. Louis. My father was working at Washington University in St. Louis. Um, but anyway, I found myself in Western Pennsylvania in the land of my ancestors. So my ancestors are um, go back in that region, actually over a couple hundred years, and it was surrounded by a very different sort of man. Western Pennsylvania is blue collar hunting, socially conservative, although lots of union guys, so like old blue dog Democrats. So that was the world I found myself in, and I found myself surrounded by these guys who knew how to do things, work with their hands, work on their own cars, build houses, stuff like that. And I grew to admire those guys. And so my own journey since then, I've been a college professor. I taught philosophy for about a decade, and I was involved in urban ministry in Boston for a long time. I've been a real estate investor since the early 1990s. I still own commercial real estate, and I've even been a home improvement contractor. So I've done a number of things. But what got me into the matter of thinking about the nature of the household is that really there were a couple things. One is I didn't grow up in an environment where I saw these things. In terms of my own personal home life, my family didn't see these things. Yeah, I didn't find myself in a household that gave me something to emulate, or I wasn't in a healthy environment, so there was nothing I could really draw from it except maybe negative lessons. Don't do this, don't do that, that kind of thing. But then when I got married and we started having kids, I thought, well, I better figure out how this works. And so I did a lot of research, and it was at that time I was at Harvard Divinity School, so I was doing did a lot of work on the subject of duty, which we'll get to because you raised the subject of piety, and historically that's just another way of talking about doing your duty, performing your duty. And then just how households prior to the Industrial Revolution were structured, how they functioned, and really got a lot of help reading Aristotle, reading Xenophon. And when I did that, I saw that the Apostle Paul was saying very similar things to Aristotle and Xenophon, and I came to see and understand that households are kind of a universal institution. We see them in every culture of the world, and they generally function along similar lines in different cultures. And so there's all sorts of things that when you get in touch with that, you can say, "Oh, wow, now that's why things were done the way they were in the past. It wasn't just some." This is usually the story you get today because of the influence of kind of cultural Marxism and stuff. Is that today it's all explained away as a kind of a power trip, kind of domination, that kind of stuff. But it was just a lot of it was just very practical and made sense and worked. So that's why they did things the way they did, because they just had to survive. So survival is a pretty significant thing. And when you don't have police, you don't have you don't have telephones you can call, the state troopers to come to your house. You don't have grocery stores. You just, all the things that we take for granted today that make it seem like we can live as little autonomous individuals with no real kind of binding connection to anybody else. That just wasn't the case for most of human history anywhere in the world. So households were ways were an institution that bound people together to work together for the common good of the people in the household.
I love how you bring that up, how it's like, when survival used to be the goal, then we stopped having so much time to sit around and pontificate on maybe what could be, what should be, like here, we don't really see those negative effects of our decision making in our households immediately because survival isn't. So, like, if a man's not in his role or a woman's not in her role or the family isn't functioning well, you can kind of live that way for a long time before you start to see the fallout of that in the household. So,
right, definitely that's the way things are in the modern world because we've got such a buffer between our lives and just kind of reality, generally speaking. Although it's getting thinner, the buffer is getting thinner and thinner, and people are becoming more and more desperate. So I think that we're going to see a revival of interest in old-fashioned ways of doing things, and I think along with that, we'll see a revival of the household.
Yeah, you speak a lot to the economical, I guess, productivity of, older households pre, industrial revolution.
Right.
And you can look at, okay, well, that's not the case anymore. Right now, usually the provider, if it's a single provision home, which still happens from time to time, they go away to work, and the home is just kind of like a stop-in station, right? You sleep there. You don't view the household as being a place of economical value creation. Now, since it's not that way, I think there's been this debate of, well, is we when you hear traditional roles or biblical roles, it's kind of like this pushback against egalitarianism. But in a lot of ways, I think and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you've said this, but this is something I kind of inferred, is that even in some conservative camps where we are advocates of what we would call traditional roles or biblical roles, we're not even viewing the household of a worthy of enough place where it almost is demeaning to the woman's role because we think, well, there's no economical value of the home. And so the women feels like they need to, if they want to provide economical value, go out of the home to create value. And that's where there's this tension. With that being the current reality, how can people, Christians in particular, how can we start making the home a place of economical value in a society and a culture that does not at all, I guess, provide very many opportunities for that?
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. I think the challenge is we need to broaden our understanding of economics to include subsistence economies. And so, like if we're just simply thinking about producing goods for the market or goods or services for the market that we can charge money for, and we reduce economics to that, we've impoverished ourselves, but we've also made ourselves dependent upon institutions outside the home. So in many respects, we've been recovering actually for a while now, a household economy, but it's not been for producing goods for the market, it's been more of a return to a subsistence approach. So perfect example would be homeschooling. So homeschooling is a lot of work, right? It's not like something we say, oh, you can, take a break now and homeschool. No, when you say we're going to homeschool, you're actually saying, no, we're going to do something that's going to produce value, and the value will be seen in our children because they're going to be enriched by this, right? So, and then they're going to be more capable of doing things themselves that are productive, not just simply for the market, but for their families, for their moms, their dads, that kind of stuff. And then hopefully in the long term, be able to care for their aged parents and stuff. And that's another thing that's I think we're recovering is long-term care for the elderly. I think more and more people, when they see this, they have the sticker shock when they learn how much it's going to cost to put mom or dad in long-term care. Whoa, we can take that money and build an addition on the house and put mom or dad in that spot and care for them. Now, obviously, there are going to be points in time where you're going to need some outside help, some expertise, that kind of thing when it comes to medicines or whatever. But still, you can bring the costs way down, but it's going to mean a whole lot more effort on your part, right? So there's a lot of work taking care of elderly people. So I think those are two areas where we're already seeing a massive recovery of the productive household. There are other ways to think about productive households as well. If you are able to acquire productive property, start a small business, these different kinds of things. Now, those things do tend to be things that, provide goods and services to the larger economy, and those are great. But not everybody can do that. So there are limitations. People maybe somebody just doesn't think that they can manage a business and maybe feels like it's best for them to work for somebody else. That's perfectly fine. But you can still bring a lot of stuff back home that's not for the market, and do it yourself.
Yeah, so I am curious. I mean, you touched on the piety thing, and this really stuck out to me because when Elisha brought up piety, I'd always thought of it as more female trait. I should say maybe more
Yeah,
feminine.
sure.
And so to think of a man being pious, you either think kind of maybe pharisaical, like proud in the piety,
Right.
or just kind of wimpy. And so anyways, but that wasn't your perspective at all, and the etymology that you broke down really had a profound impact on both of us when it comes to that term. So could you just kind of explain to our listeners what piety actually is and why it's something that we should have as Christians?
Yeah, and by the way, in antiquity, there were male and female kind of expressions of piety. So piety just simply means making return, a dutiful and grateful return to those who have been your benefactors. So obviously that would be your parents immediately, honor your father or mother. That's piety. But it would also mean, the founding fathers of your town or city or whatever, or your country. So patriotism was considered pious. Then, of course, ultimately God. God is the ultimate source of all good things that we enjoy. And so we we have a duty to express gratitude and serve the one who's given us everything that we need to live, right? So that's piety. One of the ways that the Romans thought about it, and by the way, Jews thought about it this way, Greeks, Romans, everybody did, and the Greek word was eusebio, which is often translated godliness, but it's pious and eusebio literally meant the same thing, just two different languages. So when we think about it in kind of the first century, the personification of piety was Aeneas. So Aeneas was one of the Trojan heroes in the Trojan War, and this is something that catches people by surprise. But the Romans believed that they were descended from the Trojans. They believed that the Trojans were their ancestors. So, according to and what happened, and this was like a common belief, but it was put into a poetic form, an epic poem by Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid. And according to the story, um, the appellation for Aeneas was always Pius Aeneas or Pius Aeneas. And what was being expressed was this was a man who did his duty, never failed to do his duty. Sometimes it was a very difficult thing to do his duty, but he did it. But in the story, the moment that it kind of it really indelibly imprinted itself in the imagination of the Roman people was when Aeneas carried his father out of Troy on his back and led his son Ilius by the hand. So he was holding the hand of his son. He had his father on his back because his father couldn't walk, and he literally fought his way out of the city that way. And so Romans, when they thought of piety, they thought of that, and they would put that on their coins. They had it on their coins. This image of Aeneas with his father on his back leading his son. So you have three generations. So there were other images that were on Roman coins that expressed female piety or feminine piety, and often it was a mother with a child. That would be the expression of a woman's pious doing her duty, piety, performing piety.
Thanksgiving is just it's upon us, and it actually kind of took a long time to get here this year. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like I've been ready for Thanksgiving for a while, but it's late. It's late in the month this year, and so because of that, the distance between Thanksgiving and Christmas is even shorter than what we are accustomed to. However, if you find yourself scrambling to buy a Christmas gift for somebody that you care about, somebody that you love, maybe that's a spouse, maybe it's a sibling, it might just be an acquaintance that's not even blood related to you. We now offer gift cards for all of our programs and products. And so if you're looking to gift music lessons, you can do that. If you're looking to gift the Get It All Done Club, you can do that. If you're looking to gift the Growth Initiative, you can do that. And so check the links below. You're able to purchase that and then get a gift card for somebody. Send them that gift or send it to them. You can just give it to them. You don't even need to send it to them. You can just give it to them on Christmas morning if that's when you open your gifts and give your gifts. And this is something that we kind of tried to get going last year. We had a few gift cards that people could use, and people seem to really enjoy doing that. And so we're doing it again this year, only we're on top of it. We're a little earlier to the game this year, so you can be earlier to the game as well with your Christmas shopping. So check all the links below on how to purchase gift cards for the Get It All Done Club, Voteberg Music Academy, for anybody that might want to learn the piano, guitar, fiddle, mandolin, ukulele, or if you've got a husband that wants to do the Growth Initiative, you can do the same thing with that. So check all those links below. Wow, it's crazy because that honestly is that's inspirational. Just as from a man, you think of tending to the elderly, your father. I don't know, that made me emotional, honestly. That's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Man, I thought I was going to act all masculine, and I just started crying like a girl right here in real time. But that does paint a vivid, that image it's visceral, and you really get a idea for what came to people's mind when they thought of the word piety, and I can imagine it really stirred up within men, like you said, both from all walks of life. This wasn't just particular to one culture of society. It sounds like it was a kind of commonly accepted thing. Excuse me. And now when I think of maybe a Christian man, or the exhortations to a Christian man, often, especially when it's anything around pietism or piety, it's usually the refraining from something. It's like, hey, you need to use temperance in all things. And of course, these are godly. A lot of these things are fruits of the Spirit, self-control, and temperance should certainly be true of Christian men. But it seems like that's all that's focused on is, hey, refrain from these things. Don't be excessive in these things. And there isn't given a vision or a mission for the man. It's like, this is actually what you are accomplishing. And so, you've spoken to this. What are ways that men could see it that way, instead of saying, okay, my job as a Christian man is to, not look at pornography, not drink too much, to make sure the bills are paid. And it really just kind of like takes the life out of things. It's kind of like it's all defensive almost. And so what is a more true vision of what piety is for the modern man?
Well, I think you see it both in Aeneas and in Abraham, and that is you serve your household. So you serve the interests of your household. So let's take those examples that you gave just a minute ago. What I think is, we all agree that yes, we shouldn't, indulge in sinful behavior. But if you kind of extrapolate, you can see how those things would undermine the integrity and health of your household. So let's say you're a man who has issues with pornography. Do you think that harms your relationship with your wife? Sure, it does. And so consequently, your wife's interests are your interests, and you're undermining, the interests of your household when you give yourself over to that stuff. Again, if you're intemperate, if you like are always flying off the handle and everybody's walking on pins and needles around you all the time, that's undermining the health and the integrity of your household. So if you have the idea that, okay, my task is to build a house that will be a dwelling that my loved ones and I can live in together, and that will carry on into the future and will be a source of fond memories to our children, but also may be actually something that continues to shelter them for generations. And that's where it all kind of ties together. So I think that's what, when it comes to losing a sense of mission, I think that's where a lot of guys kind of zone out, is they don't see how the task of building a household is an expression of their pious regard to God, because you're modeling it on something, and we can talk about that in a minute. But also the way you care for those who are your dependents, and one of the reasons you do that is because your ancestor did that for you, so you pass it along.
I really love that picture too of that. You say your dependents, and I think in modern culture, people our age like to, or still a lot of them are very heavily dependent on their parents in a way to help with their child raising, or to just help financially, or just to help. And I think that's a really common, it's seen as a really good thing, because people go, well, we need these multi-generational families. It takes a village, right? And I need support. But what I love about that picture of Aeneid coming out of the city was he was the warrior. And like, we're in our youth right now. You're in this, like, the strongest season of your life. He had his dad on his back and he was holding his son. And I think it would change. I think a lot of people would take more responsibility for their households if we saw our parents being ones that were actually like, were the village to them and to our children, this generation of ours, instead of being still a dependent generation that needs everything coming to us to take care of us. Because I don't know, I love the strength in that, of like, hey, these are the years of your youth, and you can take on a lot, and you can take on the younger generation, and you can take on the older generation, and support both generations.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think a lot of it has to do with just hearing that. I think that when people hear about this way of life, or are reminded of it, it's not as though it's a really strange concept. It's more like an aha moment for a lot of people. Of course, that's the way it's supposed to work. So what's happened is we live in a society that's kind of caused us to kind of walk around in a fog where we just don't see the obvious. And every once in a while, some wind will come and blow the fog away, and then you can see things plainly, and you say, "Oh, of course, this is the way it's always been." Why have we lost sight of that? That's a whole other conversation. But I've never had any trouble helping people see the significance of the household. The challenge comes in when it comes to making it happen. That's where a lot of people have questions about how to go about it and stuff like that. So they get it. But then the next, question is how do I do it?
And what is your lead in to that? I mean, what, in a nutshell, I'm sure there's a lot, but what would be the first thing that you would say if the desire was there in a couple to be like, yes, we want this. Where do we start?
Yeah, I think that the place to begin is, thinking about your own debts, in the sense that, what you owe to your parents, to God, and so forth. But then you're kind of thinking forward too, because it's about passing on what you've received. So it's not just that you're making a return to those who have helped you, you are because in many respects they may not even need what you have to give, or they may be gone. So then it becomes passing it on down to the next generation. So it's in a very intergenerational kind of thing. And when we think in terms of the generations, a lot of the craziness in our world just kind of just melts away. Um, when we think generationally, we immediately think men and women, right? We need each other if we're going to have another generation, right? So there's this obvious thing.
It's a good point.
Then there is like just the kind of the natural division of roles and things that just make sense. And it becomes not so much you trying to like, create a reality as much as it is trying to pass on good things you've received to another generation. So I think a lot of people are kind of wrapped up in this sort of modern attempt to kind of create a new kind of reality, and they always discover kind of too late that you can't pull it off because you're not God, and so you kind of have to say, okay, well, there's a wise and loving Father who's made us and has given us some roles, and these are good things. Now, they might not always be easy things. They might not be things that just come naturally all the time, but they're still good, and we can work at it.
Yeah, and I guess when I think of trying to give people, even if say maybe they don't have a vision for the household and they don't like they don't have a sentiment towards it. It's kind of like, yeah, I agree in my head, but there's nothing's touching on my heart here. Could you speak to, again, going back to the title, why the cosmos? Why is this a battle for the cosmos? And how
Right.
why is it the family is so much more a part of the fabric of reality than what we even here in Western culture really have the capacity to even wrap our mind around?
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I think we suffer from is a kind of amnesia, but another thing is a kind of practical atheism, kind of a de facto atheism, where we look out into the night sky and we don't see what our ancestors saw. Our ancestors saw a cosmic dance and a sort of a beautiful harmony. That's what they saw. Now, of course, they didn't have telescopes and they didn't know about, how vast the universe is or anything, but they could still see that there was something harmonious that they were looking out on, and they could sense that they were part of this very big thing. And so what they did is they understood that a household was a kind of microcosm of a larger order. So when we think about this within a Christian framework, what we can do is observe that Christ is the groom and the church is the bride, right? And there's a kind of household that's being established, the household of God, and that what belongs to Christ belongs to the church. So everything that Christ, uh, enjoys it because he is, the anointed one, Son of God. We, as the bride of Christ, the church, also enjoy authority, riches, all these different things that we've been made to enjoy it because the church is united to Christ. There's a covenant. This is a new covenant. Like when we think about marriage covenants, so a marriage covenant between a man and woman reflects this uh, covenant between Christ and the church. So the cosmos is the order. The Greek word cosmos actually just meant order, the largest order of them all. And then our households are microcosms, miniature versions of that order intended to reflect it. So when we think about the love and the harmony of the eternal household of God, that should be reflected in our households. The same kind of harmony, the same kind of co-laboring, being joined together, working on common things, enjoying common wealth, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a way bigger, I guess, vision than what I ever had for the family. And I would have considered myself to hold the family in high esteem. Seeing that it is that, original institution we see from the beginning, from that institution, everything's transpired here, on God's created earth. Uh in regards to, I guess, marriage, and then in regards to the children with the household and how we actually, are able to wrap our mind around this mystery that is the household, what is it that led you to even wanting to see it in this light? Was it something that was revealed to you without you even stumbling upon it, or were you yourself looking for motivation as you were married and then you had children, and there was a moment of kind of like, okay, so why am I doing this in the first place? Because I think a common narrative, at least in my generation, is, hey, we're part of the household of God. That is that done deal. That so like, yeah, get married if you need to, because it's better to marry than to burn. If you're blessed with children, bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But it's not. I guess the what I would say, you talk about duty and piety. I don't think the modern Christian feels any duty towards marriage or towards children. They say our duties to God. We're in His household, and they almost treat it like, well, now that there's the household of God, we can do away with the earthly family. I don't think that's true, but could you speak to kind of that concept?
Yeah, well, I agree. It's not true. I think that it reinforces it. It doesn't undermine it. And I think that the notion that somehow the household of God makes human households um, uh, kind of obsolete is getting way, down the road in the story. We're not there yet. So we know we're given a vision of an eternal state. Um, when the Lord is asked by the Sadducees, he's given that story about the woman who married the seven brothers and all that. You're probably familiar with that one. And I would have asked by the third son. I was like, what's this girl doing to these guys?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways, yeah, I would have suspected some foul play, but but anyway, I'm having a little fun. But the idea though that that Christ was trying to get across is that when the new creation is realized, there's going to be a whole different order of things, but we're not there yet. So just because you're a member of the church doesn't mean that you have arrived in sort of the final state of things. So yes, there is a point in the future where my wife will be more like my sister and won't be my wife in the way she is today. But for now, we are a picture of the way the world will be someday. But for the time being, we are husband and wife in the way that Christ and the church are husband and wife, and we try to embody that in our lives together. And it's pretty. It gets down to some pretty mundane stuff. Mundane not being a bad thing, but just meaning just like life in the world kind of stuff. Mowing the lawn, doing the dishes, just all the stuff, that comes with just kind of, living together and trying to be a blessing to each other. So, yeah. So when it comes to that, I think that sometimes what's really going on is that there's a whole other agenda that's being served, and sort of this idea that we don't need households that bear children and care for each other. Is actually serving an agenda that maybe people even aren't even aware that they're serving. They just are being carried along by sort of, I'd say, cultural trends and winds, and they're just not giving it any thought. But what I've observed is when people stop and they think, it doesn't take them very long to realize, wow, I'm being carried along by an agenda that doesn't even serve my own interests. I'm part of some other big project that I'm like being used by.
Where do you think that stems from? Do you think it's just a totally secular idea that's infiltrated the church, or where do you think we're getting that root?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think there are different ways that we hear are being sort of enculturated into it. There's obviously media, there's education, and even political stuff. But I do think that for most people, they're just being carried along by kind of the conventional wisdom of the world. So like, like when you're in high school and your guidance counselor talks to you about the future, the guidance counselor never brings up marriage, right? It's always, what's your career going to be? So that's kind of like the starting point. And then in order to pursue that career, what do you got to do? You got to go to college, right? In many cases, not every case, but in most cases, if you want to be respected and considered to be a success, right? You got to do that. Well, you look into this sort of what's going on, you discover, well, there are educational interests that are being served when you go to schools, right? I mean, that's how they make, that's how they keep their institutions running, going. That doesn't imply that what they're doing is fallacious or anything, but it just that there is an interest. There's an interest that's being served there, and maybe it's not in your best interest. And I think many people are starting to question that, college education, both men and women I think are getting more and more kind of, well, skeptical about what it promises. But there are also corporate interests. Um, there's always been a kind of competition between, say, the state and the household, and that goes way back, to antiquity. Um, but now we have other players, other institutions, and everybody's kind of fighting for the same thing, and that is everybody's devotion, everybody's labor, and you're being asked to kind of get into all these, and then promises are made. So promises like if you go to college here, well, then everybody will admire you, and you'll be considered a better person than if you didn't go to school to this place. If you work at this prestigious company, same kinds of things occur. Promises are made. So we can be carried along, but and none of those things are in and of themselves a bad thing. I'm all for a college education. I'm all for productive work being performed with other people and some worthwhile venture. That's all great, but I think that because a household is so closely held and it's just a few people who are working together, you have to be kind of defensive about it. You got to work at trying to preserve its interest because no one else is going to do that except you. Um, Everybody's going to find a reason why. Even your local church will find a reason why you need to spend more time there. And sometimes you do, but um, so you're going to be pulled in lots of different directions, and you're going to have to make a commitment to your household and stick to it. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself someday down the road saying, "Man, I wish I had spent more time with my kids or spent more time with my wife or whatever."
Yeah, you make a point. I forget in which book, how with child labor laws and because of past, abuses of children when it comes to the labor force and things like that, there's this negative connotation with your children being of economical value to you, or bringing
Right.
any type of value into the home. And that then you go to point out, it's like we're not allowed to get economical value out of our children, but everyone else is,
That's
right?
right.
Because
That's
that's
right.
exactly the schools are dependent on them, the
Right.
coaches, the healthcare system.
Right.
They are their whole, I guess, business model is based on your children, and they're
Right.
getting economical value out of your children. And I like how you kind of point out that the more dependence you're able to gain from those institutions, you inherently are becoming a place of value. Your household is becoming a value creation center, and I really like that. On a more
Yeah.
practical note, you you said in passing at the beginning you've invested in commercial real estate. Not, I think that's cool to hear because not everybody feels like they want to go be an entrepreneur and start their own business, and they might feel ill-equipped. Um, is that something that, I mean, because you said you got into it in the 90s, and so you've been through a few different, I guess, climates of economies up until this point. Is that the type of thing where you're like, yeah, there's a handful of ways that you can start finding more financial independence from your job, or adding some investments that could have generational impact to your home? Is real estate just one of many, or do you feel like that's kind of like the most obvious one?
Well, it's one of many. It is a fairly obvious one, but it's just one of many. I think you're only limited by your creativity and your abilities. So when it comes to developing productive property, the sky is the limit, and it's just based on what I just said, your ability and your imagination. So like I use this illustration: silicon is sand. It's what we make computer chips out of. So you go from this practically worthless material to something that produces a great deal of value. And what was the difference? Well, creativity and insight and risk taking and all these different kinds of things. So between my wife and I, because my wife has done a number, our kids are grown, they're out of the house, but my wife has taught piano, the entire time our children were home. She homeschooled for a while, and then she became a music teacher at a Christian school. But she's in the other room right now teaching a lesson. So she's always had that kind of thing going on. But between us, last time I counted, I think we had 8 or 9 streams of income and they didn't happen overnight. These things kind of develop, with time and as you start new things. But I've been a pastor the entire time, so it's possible to be employed, so to speak. If for in case people didn't know, pastors are technically self-employed. So we, from the standpoint of the government, pay are subject to all the rules of the self-employed. But on another hand, another way, you can say, well, I'm an employee of the church. It's kind of weird. It's a very weird place. When I try to explain my taxes to people, they're just like, what are you talking about? That's just the oddest thing. But anyway, so even though I've been involved in, serving churches, and all the churches I've served have been growing churches, I've still been able to do a number of other things.
Yeah, and I guess, in regards to doing other things, you mentioned the multiple sources of income, streams of income. Katie and I joked about how, we'll hear these stats thrown around where, that the average millionaire or multimillionaire has this many streams of income. And so people take that and they go, well, I need to go start multiple businesses. But I think you illuminated a great point. This happens over time. You need to do one well. So like you should probably first be good at your job and be doing good at that. And then maybe get one additional and then get good at that one and then add the other, and you build on them. And I think that's a lot easier to do, to have that patience when you are thinking multi-generationally.
Well, and I am 62, so it's been a little while that I've been at it.
So this brings to mind a conversation that we had, and I can't remember if this stemmed from Sarah Wiley's books, but it was that concept that we, like when our parents pass away, we want to liquidate all their assets instead of keeping the assets. Was that you?
Yeah.
I talk about that. Yeah, I talk about that.
Yeah. Can you touch on that a little bit? Because I thought that was really interesting. What we do in Western culture and how we see investments and just wanting to liquidate things versus keeping them to pass them on to the next generation.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple ways to think about it. One is that there are basically two mindsets. There's the mindset of an employee, then there's the mindset of an owner. And generally, the one percenters, when we think about, the most wealthy people, they have an intergenerational mindset. So this is something that's lost on a lot of folks. Very wealthy families behave like old-fashioned families, and the way they think about their assets and about how to bring their children into them. So, like someone like a Donald Trump, who everybody knows about because he's president-elect, but he was well known before he got into politics because of his business ventures and things like that. Now, if you look at his household, all of his kids are in the business. Not just the political business, but just the business. So they're all very tightly connected to him. There was this marvelous video I saw of him talking to his youngest son, Barron, who's like 6'9" or something now. It was just like this giant of a kid. But this is when he was small. And his father just, got up to him and said, what he expected of him. And it was pretty clear that he had high standards for his kids, and partly that was because he was wanting to get them ready to handle what he was going to give them. You're going to have to be in a position to be able to run this stuff someday. So that kind of mindset, you see it like with the Walton family, like with Walmart. All of the kids are like owners in the business. You see it with the Mars family, the candy makers. It's a family business to this day. And so, the boys and the girls, everybody's involved in the family business. And you don't want to liquidate the assets because the assets take a while to mature. And if you keep cutting them up, they're going to act that your returns are actually going to shrink as well. So that the trick is how to. So here's a fun story. So that the Man of the House book was originally commissioned to be published by a German publisher called Herder and Herder of Germany, and it's a long story as to why it didn't end up with them. But I got to talk to uh, the American heiress of the family concern, and she was the seventh generation that held this family print publishing company.
Wow.
So, when they talked about the founder of the company, it's their great, 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 great grandfather. and so, they inherit it and they're trying to keep it going so they can hand it on to the next generation.
What's bizarre is that seems so inspirational, I think, to the average person when you look at it from the billionaire's perspective. You're thinking, well, of course they would want to prepare their children to continue on in the family business. But yet we lose that perspective when it's even just upper middle class, right? You say it's
Right.
whatever the career, a medical doctor that has his two children and they live a comfortable upper middle class life. It almost seems restrictive if you are to persuade your children to carry on something that you've started. You say no, they need to go find themselves. If they want to be, if they want to go be a tattoo artist, across the country, they need to be free to go pursue that dream, and I
Right.
can't hinder them. And then at the same time, it makes sense almost like in what we would consider more impoverished maybe climates where it's like, well, yeah, you need to stick in the family business because they've worked so hard to do this. We're barely getting by. They can't afford employees. So once you're of a productive age, it's your duty, going back to that duty, to work in the family business. And yet in the middle class, we seem to kind of miss that vision. What do you think that there are practical ways that middle class family could, because maybe we don't, the assets might not be as obvious to us, right? It might not be hard assets or value, monetarily money creating assets. What are things that we can start in doing as, middle class people to kind of pass on that multi-generational expectation from our children to carry on what it is that we've started?
Well, I think you begin with just having conversations about this kind of stuff. I think it's important that you recognize your children's interests and abilities. Um, and what you try to do is you try to work with those and find ways to kind of bring things together. So, like in our case, my oldest son, he's in Nashville with his family, and he's an audio engineer, so he's in the music and audio production world. He's the one that handles all of the intellectual stuff that I do. So he's the guy who manages our podcast and does that kind of stuff. And we pay him, so he's paid, so he's not doing it for nothing. But in terms of like the audio book for Man of the House, he was the guy who produced it. And so there are a number of things that he and I are working on together on a weekly basis. We're interacting, even though we're in different parts of the country, we're interacting probably daily on different kinds of things. And we see each other regularly in terms of, family trips and stuff like that. So they're out here. So he and his family were out here to record a conference for us at our church here just last month. So I got to see my granddaughters, and for that reason. And then, so that's him. My second son, he manages all the real estate in Connecticut, but he's actually a foreman at a steel company. So he oversees about 30 men. He's only like 27 himself, but he's really good. He was a blacksmith and a welder and stuff. So he's really good with his hands. But even as a little guy, I could see that he had a gift in that area. And so, we would talk, and he but it's not like I had to ever push him into anything. He was just completely motivated. He built his own forges. Uh, he actually cast the wedding rings for him and his wife. Did you ever see that episode of Parks and Recreation where Ron Swanson makes the wedding rings? Well, my son actually did that, from him and his wife. And then my daughter, she's very, you know, gifted as well, and very bright. In her case, it was interesting. She's the most academically gifted. She scored in the top 1% on the SAT in both the math and the language, and so she was kind of Ivy League material. But she didn't want to go to college. She just wanted to become a mom, and I had to talk her into it. So she ended up going to college, and I knew that she needed to find a certain kind of guy, and she was only going to probably find that guy at college, and so they got married. But so anyways,
It worked out.
so yeah, it worked out great. So she's got a baby, and but the how you work with each of those kids is kind of specific to that child, and you want to work with them in a way that helps them to kind of blossom in terms of their gifts, but then find ways to work those gifts into sort of family projects. So when it comes to our productive property, all the kids are involved in some kind of way, but not in a full-time way. So they're all kind of doing it part-time, but they have their own jobs that they do. So like in the case of my oldest son, he's got lots of clients. I'm just one of his clients.
That's really cool to hear that because it's interesting. I just finished reading an old autobiography by Ivanka Trump, and it's fascinating to hear how the appeal was there. She wanted to work with her dad. He wasn't like forcing her into anything. And I think that's something that we kind of miss out on in the way that we sell our kids what we're doing is do we believe in it enough that we love it enough and we think it's impactful enough that they're drawn to that and are like, that is the ideal thing. I want to have that kind of impact. I want to be able to work with my parents. That would be my dream. Instead of we grump about what we do, we don't love it, and then be like,
Right.
and you have to, and then yeah, you seem like a lame person if you're like, no, and now you have to stay here and work in this.
That's right. Sorry,
When we
I hate what I do, and I'm going to make you do it.
Yeah, exactly. Like that doesn't make sense. And so we think, oh
Right.
no, you need to go out and pursue your dream because like mine's
Right.
a failed mess over here.
Oh, right.
Instead of really pouring into where the Lord has us and attracting kids that way. Like all your kids, it sounds like want to be a part of what you're doing in some way, even though they have totally different giftings. And we live in a very modern world that facilitate, living in different places and doing a variety of different things.
Yeah, I think you're right on to something there. I think, if you love what you're doing and your kids watch you at doing it, they'll probably be drawn to it. And then, you need to make sure you treat your kids fairly, pay them what they deserve to be paid and things like that so they don't feel like they're being taken advantage of. And, now I'm not talking about just the normal stuff around the house. I mean, that's not stuff you pay people necessarily to do. Although I'm not against allowances, I'm not saying anything about that, but I'm just getting at if you're going to bring the kids into the family business, then it needs to be handled in a business-like way.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually I really appreciate you giving the example of your children because I think that's really helpful to me and to our listeners to see that like this doesn't even have to be a full-time thing, because it might be so obvious again going back to the Trumps where it's like, well, yeah, there's all these positions that they have available to
Right.
fill. Like look at the org chart, just train them up for one of those positions and plug them into the family business. Well, not every family is going to have all
Correct.
these roles, director of marketing, or CFO or whatever it is to train their children up for. And so you can expect that your children will have their own career, so to speak, where they're out doing this thing. But within that, you hopefully have something going on, whether that's ministry, whether it's just the flow of your home that they want to be able to come back and plug their gifts and talents into. I even think of this a smallest thing, of hospitality, where families
Yeah.
have we grew up with some great families and they had their Friday night pizza and volleyball night, and it
Yeah.
started out with a couple
Yeah.
families and then all of a sudden it's 100 people. Well,
Yeah.
that's the type of you can add economical value as you get older. You say, well, we want to be
Yeah.
a part of this with you, mom and dad. Yeah, they have their own job, but they're coming into this thing that was started by the household.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
with all
That's
that
great.
said, maybe some closing thoughts. I love how you talk about Ephesians as being, what is that, waging war on peace. Just kind of a letter to families. And when it gets to those familial verses, he's given so much
Yeah.
context. Could you kind of maybe give us some closing thoughts around that, and then let us know where we can find you.
Sure, sure. Well, I think that I have this thesis that in part was the basis for that book, Household and War for the Cosmos. But I can't substantiate it. It's mostly just a hunch, and that is that the Apostle Paul, when he wrote Ephesians, was in some sense responding to the Roman sort of ethos and responding to even the story of the Aeneid. Because there are some striking parallels, and one of those parallels is the armor that comes at the end. When we see in chapter 6, where we're given the armor. Aeneas actually was given heavenly armor as well. It was made by Hephaestus at the request of his mother Venus. So, according to the story, Aeneas's mother was Venus. So, can you imagine having Venus as your mother? So she's asks Hephaestus, who is like the god of the forge, to make a special suit of armor for her son. And so he does that. And so the suit of armor is given to Aeneas. And in a similar way, we as Christians have been given an armor made by God himself. And we're intended to put that armor on and fight the good fight. Part of that fight has to do with defending God's house and extending its borders, sort of making it greater. And in a real way, too, that is what we should be thinking about with our own microcosms, our own small houses, the natural houses that we find ourselves in. We should be fighting for them, defending their interests. Doesn't mean we need to be antagonistic or hostile towards anybody, but we still need to think about, our household's interests and keep them, foremost in our minds and hearts. They come in second behind our love for the Lord, of course, but there doesn't need to be a competition. In other words, those things can kind of be harmonized. So as we're, fighting for our kids, we're fighting for, their welfare and the long-term prospects of our households. All these things that we're fighting for are constructive and can be a blessing to, of course, people who are in our households, but even beyond to people who enjoy the benefits of just being associated with us because of the richness of the households that we've been able to build by God's grace. So those are a few thoughts. When it comes to following me, I've got a podcast called the Theology Pugcast, and I'm on that show with a couple of other friends, and it's been going for a few years now. We're up to like episode 320 or something like that. It's been a lot of shows, and it's been a lot of fun to do that. And then I do write, and the things I write come out in different places. I'm working on another book. I'm actually working on a few books. I just need to get them done.
Well, that's exciting. And yeah, I'll be looking for those books, hopefully. Are these nonfiction, fiction? Because I know you do a bit of both.
Yeah, well, they're both. So I'm working on a book right now on artificial intelligence, believe it or not. And I hope to have that one done in the spring. And then I've got a couple of fiction projects. I've got a picture book I'm working on that I just kind of have been laboring on for years whenever I get some time to work on it. It's a children's picture book. And then there's a young adult series that I've been working on forever. And so I get to that every once in a while.
Fun. You have the long-term projects and then the ones that have due dates that you have to hit.
Yeah. I never hit my due dates, but what are they going to do? Just take what I've got and publish that? No.
Yeah.
So I kind of have them where I want them.
Nice. Good. Well, thank you so much for just continuing to, put out such helpful and entertaining and insightful and, intellectually engaging content that really is uplifting. So I just pray and hope that you continue to do this and that more and more people find your resources because they're a blessing to our home. I'm grateful. Again, I'm grateful. I think it was our cousin Payne that gave us the first book, Man of the House. And from that, I've just been loving it. And just starting to peel back the layers. So thank you so much, Pastor Wiley. And we'll link everything below where our listeners can find you.
All right. Thank you. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.